Everyone to our Acta Urban informal stakeholder meeting. We have an agenda for you that we will post. We're not going to do introductions of all of you, but we'll do introductions of all of us here in the front table. And I am the director of the Department of Water Resources, Tom Bushatsky, and I'll turn it to my staff to the right.
Morning, folks. My name is Ben Bryce, newly joined the department as a special advisor to the director.
My name is Natalie Mast. I'm the Active Management Areas Director.
Good morning, Emily Petrick, Deputy Counsel for the department.
Thanks. So this concept has been discussed, I think, on the legislative side. It's been discussed in the Governor's Water Policy Council, but we wanted to expand the folks who could be involved in these discussions. This concept, I think, is a really important one to flesh out. It can certainly help us with our development and home building sector, which I think you all know has some challenges that have daylighted in both the Pinal and Phoenix active management area with our updated models going as far back as 2017. So with that really brief introduction, I will turn it over to Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you, Director. All right, before we begin, I just want to cover just a few logistical items. Please note that this is being recorded and will be available on the new Ag to Urban dedicated webpage, which some of you have probably already seen, but for those who haven't, it's here on the screen and we'll get it at the end of the presentation too. If you have any technical problems for those who are online, hopefully no one here in the room would have those. You can contact the ADWR help desk at 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov. So today we'll cover 5 items. First, the Ag to Urban concept and this informal stakeholder process. We'll next talk about underlying principles informing what we're doing here that were set by the Governor's Water Policy Council Assured Water Supply Committee. We'll talk about 2 guardrails, specifically land eligibility and conversion rates. After that, I'll hand it over to Natalie to dig into the data that we'll use to make an assessment of the proper conversion rates using a dashboard created by the department. During the presentation, we will open things up for conversation. We hope that it would be informal, not super formal here, but we'll roll with it with whatever happens. There we go. Before we dig into the presentation, I do want to set some expectations for the input that we hope to receive. We'll be introducing a discussion of land eligibility, like I said, and the data that would underlie any decision about conversion rates. So as you take time to think about what you see here today, both in this meeting and as you process it later, we would invite whatever input you want to share. And we have created a dedicated email address for input on this process, and we'll show that to you at the end of this presentation. All right, as you know, and as the director just said, we are in an era of limits, but a properly designed framework for an Ag to Urban proposal could allow for responsible growth while reducing water use. Within the active management areas, there are irrigation grandfathered rights that are not replenished and use significant amounts of groundwater. Additionally, there is unmet demand in the Pinal and Phoenix AMAs, along with current shortages in Colorado River deliveries. We know that deeper shortages are coming. These issues are creating significant difficulties for farmers, developers, and home builders. And the Assured Water Supply Program stops new development in certain areas when there is unmet demand. And this is what the Assured Water Supply Program is supposed to do. It's supposed to ensure sustainable development that protects consumers. If done right, an Ag to Urban concept could function within the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program while providing flexibility for a new voluntary program. So here's the goal: to allow voluntary conversion of unreplenished high water use irrigation grandfathered rights to low water urban uses under the consumer protections of the Assured Water Supply Program, including consistency with the management goal requirements within the Pinal and Phoenix AMAs. last session, or I should say, as you know, the concept of converting from high water use agriculture to low water urban uses is not a new concept within the AMAs. And last session, an iteration of this concept was introduced and debated in the legislature. That particular version would have created an exemption from the physical availability requirements of the Assured Water Supply Program. Ultimately, that version was not enacted into law, and there were a few reasons for that. Water savings, consumer protections, and more stakeholder discussions were needed to ensure all relevant stakeholders were involved and all the issues were properly discussed. Last month, at the Governor's Water Policy Council, the department announced that we would begin an informal stakeholder process to investigate an alternative ag-to-urban approach that could be adopted through rule as part of the Assured Water Supply Program. The intent is to investigate an ag-to-urban concept and to foster full stakeholder participation. So today we begin that process. As part of this effort, like I said, we've created a new webpage that you can go to find all the relevant information that we will be making available to stakeholders, including recordings of all of these meetings. We've also created this dedicated email that you can use to send us anything you have to say about the program. And we expect informal stakeholder conversations to continue over the next few months. So we'll touch on the principles established by the Governor's Water Policy Council. Specifically, an appropriate ag-to-urban program would help us address challenges revealed by the Assured Water Supply Program modeling projections while continuing to strengthen the integrity of the Assured Water Supply Program, protect consumers and aquifers, and ensure future growth is not reliant on mined groundwater. Last month, at the Governor's Water Policy Council, we introduced potential program guardrails to ensure that we meet that expectation. And today, we will talk about just two of those: land eligibility and conversion rates. Beginning with land eligibility, to be eligible to participate in the program, an applicant must have lands with an irrigation grandfathered right. Naturally, applicants would need to be in compliance with reporting requirements and other legal requirements applicable to those rights. Second, an applicant must have irrigated those lands with groundwater in 3 of the prior 5 years to relinquishment, or I should say 3 of the 5 years prior to relinquishment. And lastly, the applicant's land cannot already have an overlying certificate of assured water supply. Here we include a hypothetical scenario illustrating some examples of ineligible and potentially eligible lands. In the top left, we see developed residential land. This has no need to incentivize an ag to urban conversion and would be ineligible under the program. Below that, we see agricultural land with an existing overlying certificate of assured water supply. Again, there's no need to incentivize that conversion here, so it would be ineligible as well. However, to the right, you'll see an irrigated grandfathered right that is being irrigated with groundwater. In this instance, those lands would be potentially eligible. I say potentially, but assuming that you meet the 3 out of 5 years use requirement, that would be eligible under the program. Now, I know we walked through a whole bunch really quickly, so in the interest of fostering a conversation, we want to open this up to any comments or questions you may have about what we just discussed. And I'm happy to walk back to any slides if that's desired. Oh, and we have a microphone right here. So anyone who's interested in commenting, raise your hand. We'll get you a mic.
And we do have folks online, so we do need to speak into the mic or they will not be able to hear.
Or we can keep.
And I'd also ask if you could introduce yourself when you speak.
Like this? Gary Gable, Arlington Canal Company. One of the issues that we have is you speak to these IGRs, I think they are, whatever. What about districts? There's a couple of them that have surface right and the IGRs. Have you talked about that or thought about that? What will happen to the land if you take the groundwater? So it still can be farmed with the surface water? I know that's a real touchy issue, but it really concerns at least, well, my district where I live, very small district.
So to clarify, your question is, in instances where you have access to both surface water and groundwater, if an,
It goes back to 1893.
sure,
And we have a right that goes back to 1893, surface water right. Then in the 70s, when they did the groundwater code, we were given certificates. I have them at home in every farmer in Arlington has an IGR certificate for 6-7 acre feet. We got an increase because of our salty brackish water. I'd like to see how that's going to be addressed, if at all, or you're just talking about if something happens with transferring the IGR, then the surface water just disappears.
got it.
What's going to happen?
What happens to the surface water?
Surface water and the ability to farm the land that had the 1893 surface water right.
Okay.
It's a very small group, but we're here.
Understood.
And this may not be the time for that discussion. That's just a question I want.
That's certainly something we can discuss further. This would involve specifically retired grandfathered or groundwater grandfathered rights. But, certainly that's something we can look at.
Gary, it's a
Discuss
good
further.
point to bring up because there are other districts further downstream from you all
Yes.
that are in the same exact situation, right? And I know I have heard from some stakeholders that there may be an issue that we might have to address in relation to this whole subflow issue that's been going on for many, many decades. And in terms of the groundwater right and the well supplying that groundwater right, that water might actually be part of the river. So I know that's been raised to me by a few stakeholders over the last few months in some of the discussions. So we'll have to think about that some more. I'm certainly aware of those rights in the Arlington Canal Company. So really appreciate you bringing up that point, and we're going to have to kind of noodle on that a bit.
Yeah, but I met you at that meeting at BID and had a long talk, and I really appreciated your insights, and I thank you for that. We have, with my father, who is deceased now, have been here several times asking about this issue, and the answer's always been, we don't know. But it sounds like we're maybe coming down to some place where we're going to get some kind of answer. We may not like the answer, but we maybe get an answer.
Oh, may I do this gentleman first?
Michael Curtis, a lawyer for a couple of districts that are similarly situated. Do we get in touch with you to get on a list of people similarly situated? How do we make sure that we get into the queue to discuss this?
Just to clarify, are you asking how to make sure that you're aware of all the conversations so the informal stakeholder meetings we'll be holding?
He's identified a particular circumstance. We have another one that's almost identical circumstance.
I see.
So when you go to have conferences with people with identical circumstances, do we need to reach out to you? Do you give notice? Just tell me what the protocol is to be sure that when you're talking about their situation, which is identical, that we're involved in that discussion.
So Mike, I think I'll make an executive decision. Folks are here who are in this situation can let us know that they are part of that group. We will put something on our website to allow folks as well to link in and let us know that they're part of that issue. Perhaps the best way to do this is, we haven't precluded the possibility of having some breakout groups, and maybe we'll decide for that particular sector of the community that has this unique situation, we can have some talks with all of those folks collectively, and then obviously bring back to this group the results of what those discussions are. I think that might be the best way. There may be some other issues that are like that, that we can make progress within the small group, bring those things back to this group for folks' consideration and understanding. Probably the best way to most efficiently use all of our time, because we know all of you have constraints on your time as well.
Have you got into, my name is Stacy Melton, I'm with Mr. Hayden. Have you got into, when you say irrigated 3 out of 5 years, has that been determined what that means? Is that you threw water on it once and all, or what is that? Is that farming it and irrigating it several times in a year? Or what is the, like, who's determining what those regulations are gonna be?
Hi, my name is Natalie Mast. I can take that question. So we are using AMA annual reports. In the context of an AMA, irrigation has a really specific definition, which is applying water to 2 or more acres of land to grow plants or parts of plants for sale or consumption. And that water use is reported on AMA annual reports. So we are using that reported water use that are submitted to the active management area on an annual basis to determine whether there was that use history.
Okay.
I've been to a lot of these meetings and I'm always, I've been to the meetings when we were trying to extend the waterlogged designation, and I don't ever really get a sense of where the aquifer is as far as safe yield. I understand from some people that the aquifer has been at safe yield for a long time. Is that true? Or is that secret information that you can't divulge, or what's happening with the aquifer? Is it at safe yield today? It's coming up, going down? We test ours every month, so just wondering if anybody knows.
So I
Tell us.
wouldn't want to try to quote the numbers off the top of my head because it's been a couple of years since I've looked at them. But we do on our website have a report that covers the 5 initial AMAs and the amount of overdraft or progress toward their respective goals. That report, I think, was published in 2021-ish, somewhere in that time period. So fairly recently. And we also have a dashboard on our website that has some of the same information. The dashboard hasn't been updated since 2021, but we are in the process of updating that underlying data. So there is information available about that.
Thank you. Just one more question and I'll shut up, but what, the AMA, we're at the tail end. Arlington we're right above Gillespie Dam, and that's the line. That's the southwestern line. Is this going to flesh out what happens there affects what happens here, or we're completely separate and different aquifers, or do we affect what happens in the Phoenix groundwater when we pump down there? What's going to be the answer to far as we're all in the AMA, but what are you going to split it up in aquifers? As a distinct, different, because I know water is very dynamic. It goes here and goes there, but anyway, that's an answer I'd like to have at some point. Thank
So
you.
Gary, I think the issue that is in front of us is the Phoenix Active Management Area model is showing unmet demand, which means groundwater can't be approved anywhere in the AMA. I am not 100% sure what the model domain is, but I'm pretty sure it includes the area you're talking about. So what goes on in that model and what goes on with water use in your area is connected to the rest of the AMA. That issue isn't really going to impact whether or not you're eligible to retire a grandfather right and get the credit under this program, right? And I'm glad you brought up the waterlogged issue, because when we get into this, like maybe subgroup that I talked about, we need to talk about that. And I think if I remember off the top of my head, I think 2034 or thereabouts is the next time we're supposed to do a
Extension.
study and a
Hopefully
recommendation to the
extension.
legislature, right? So, I know we talked with all of you in that area the last time we did that study. We probably wanted maybe a little shrinking of the waterlogged area. You guys wanted a longer time period.
Definitely wanted longer.
We'll get into that discussion again on that issue. And I know that's a really important issue in terms of not just the near-term water use under the groundwater code and the exemptions you have because you are in the waterlogged area, but how that water might be eligible or not under the Assured Water Supply Program, absent this program, right?
Thank you.
Do we have anybody online?
People that are online, if you can raise your hand, please, virtually.
Doug Dunham, why don't you go ahead? You can unmute yourself and speak up.
Thank you. Doug Dunham with EPCOR. During your introduction, you used a couple examples of lands that may or may not qualify with issued certificates of assured water supply as a disqualifying condition. What about lands located within a designated water provider's service area? I would assume that if the IGFR has not been extinguished and it meets the 3 of 5 use requirements, that would still be eligible for potential conversion, or have you thought through that yet?
Hi, Doug. This is Natalie. So at this point, we are considering that those lands would be potentially eligible, presuming they could meet the groundwater use and 3 out of 5 eligibility criteria.
Thank you.
Anyone else online? Oh,
Simone Jules, Root City of Chandler. I'm just curious on the land eligibility requirement. If the IGFR is 100 acres and the groundwater reported on the annual report is demonstrating significantly less than the 100 acres was irrigated. So maybe out of the entire 100 acres, only 1 acre was irrigated. Does the entire IGFR get counted, or the entire number of acres get counted for the conversion factor? So how much of the boundaries of the IGFR has to have actually been irrigated in order for it to qualify?
Thanks, Simone. I think that's an area that we might need to have some discussion. At this point, we haven't really parsed down that far into the details of that specific issue, but I think that's something we could definitely have additional conversations about and consider how exactly that might be defined.
So Simone, it also connects to one of the issues that's really important, and that is we want to show a long-term reduction of groundwater through this program, right? So it kind of connects to that issue as well. So as Natalie said, we'll have more discussion about that and also about that linkage to that issue.
all right. I'm not seeing anyone else online or here in the room, but unless there's anything else, we can move on to the next section. And of course, if you think of something, there'll be more opportunities to talk. Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll move to conversion rates. As a reminder, when we talk about conversion rates, we're talking about the volume of water in acre feet per acre that could be assigned to a qualifying IGFR that is relinquished to create credits towards the assured water supply physical availability criteria. I know there's a lot packed into that, so we wrote it down. As the department assesses appropriate conversion rates for the Pinal and Phoenix AMAs, there are certain key considerations to keep in mind. First, the two AMAs are distinct. So setting proper conversion rates will require a review of AMA-specific data and conditions. This is especially important since we need to ensure that we generate significant water use reductions. That's the point, right? Last but certainly not least, remember that the conversion rates will impact CAGRD replenishment. The Assured Water Supply Program requires consistency with the management goal for each of the AMAs. Now, before I hand things over to Natalie to walk through the data, and consistent with what the director just said about having some breakout groups, I'll note that this will be a pretty high-level conversation of the data. So we'll form an Ag to Urban specific technical working group. And this is for the folks who are technical experts who want to dig into the data-heavy elements of this. So if you want to join that group, you can follow this QR code. Oh, I didn't even change the slide. I'm sorry, everybody. Here we go. Okay, you can follow this QR code right here that will let you join into this, and you'll receive information about the technical working group. I'll note that for anybody who does not join this group but wants to know what's going on, all the information will continue to be made public, will be posted to the Ag to Urban webpage, and there will be recordings there available for you as well. And that's all that I want to say there.
Well, let me interject, Ben. So for those of you, some of you in this room have been following these discussions, either the legislative discussion or the Governor's Water Council. But for those of you who haven't, the impact of this program on the GRD is a pretty big issue, right? The GRD plan of operation for the next 10 years is in front of the department right now for the next phase, and we're going through the process as required by statute to make the determination regarding that plan. And I know we've talked a bit with the GRD folks at CAWCD, and we're trying to work with them, as we talked about in the council, try to get a handle on what this might mean for them. So that's a really important issue that will face us in this program. And obviously, the conversion rate and the net long-term benefit in reduction of groundwater was also a really big issue that was talked about, as well as in the conversion rate and the volume that might be created. And there was a bullet saying it's AMA specific. It's going to be different in the two AMAs in Pinal and Phoenix, because the health of the aquifer in those two AMAs is very different, and the hydrogeology in those two AMAs is very different. And so we talked quite a bit about that so far in the council, and the importance of finding the right criteria that attach to either AMA and do address the actual physical conditions and the hydrogeology in each one of the AMAs.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Again, my name's Natalie Mast. I'm the Active Management Areas Director at ADWR. Some of you may have seen this before, but we're going to run through this because we wanted to make sure that folks were kind of starting from the same baseline here. So what I'm going to do here first is walk through a data tool that we have publicly available on our website right now. Ben mentioned the technical working group. Our intent in that technical working group is to do a deeper dive of this data and to also hopefully make some improvements, add some things to the dashboard to improve on this tool and allow folks to play with some of the scenarios, see really the results of this data in order to provide a lot of transparency really on this data and this analysis. So what the dashboard shows right now, and again, we will probably be updating this in the coming weeks and months. What the dashboard shows right now is a sample of some of the projections that we have been working on to really understand the potential future under an ag to urban program. The dashboard is interactive, and I'll walk through exactly how it can be used. And it is available both through our public meetings calendar and on our dedicated Ag to Urban webpage. There is also a downloadable data set with the underlying data in an Excel format available that can be downloaded from those same web pages. So this is what the dashboard looks like. And I recognize that this is a lot of information all at once. So I'm going to walk through it piece by piece so folks can understand kind of what each chart is and how the different assumptions and filters can be toggled. So we have with the dashboard specific inputs that you're able to combine in different ways and change the results that are displayed on the dashboard. The Phoenix and Pinal AMAs are different. So I'll show you, once I pull up the live dashboard in a moment here, I'll show you, we actually have one dashboard specific to the Phoenix AMA and a duplicate one that is specific to the Pinal AMA. So they are laid out the same, but focused on the different areas. The results that are shown in the dashboard are based on the inputs that you select. So these filters that you see here have to have a selection, a single selection on each one in order for the data to show correctly. So yeah, so once you select your inputs using your two filters, we have a conversion rate filter and a replenishment filter. I'll touch on those in a minute. Once you select your filters, what it shows is a combination of several charts. So the first chart at the top is a status quo. So this basically shows the future projected without an Ag to Urban program. What we've seen in the past is that agricultural water use changes over time. It's decreased over the historic period that we have reporting available for. And so we've continued that trajectory here. So what you can see, for those in the room, I'll use the pointer here. The top blue bars here, so sorry, let me start that over. Here we go. There's a zero line here where the light colors and the dark colors meet. And the things above that zero line indicate that those are withdrawals from the aquifer. Anything below that zero line indicates that that's an offset to those withdrawals from the aquifer. So in this instance, what we have is, I'm hitting the wrong button here. In dark blue, we have agricultural water use. In light blue, we have agricultural recharge. So those two things off, the agricultural incidental recharge offsets that agricultural water use. We also have industrial water use as a part of this forecast. For lands that are retired might not just remain vacant, there is an assumption that some industrial use might come in on those lands. And what you see with the green line is the net water use after you take into account both the demands and any offsets to those demands. So similarly, we also have a chart. So this is the second chart that you'll see on the dashboard that shows the program level projections. So this chart is going to change depending on what inputs you select for the conversion rate and the replenishment assumptions. So similarly, we've got this zero line, right? We have municipal water use in pink as a demand, municipal incidental recharge as an offset to that demand, and replenishment as an offset to municipal demand. And again, similarly here, we still have the agriculture that you can see declining over time as municipal uses come in and take its place. And you have the green balance line that shows kind of the result between your demands and any offsets. All right, so two charts that show a status quo scenario, kind of your control scenario, if you will, plus a chart that shows your program projections. What this does is takes those two green lines that show your balance between the demands and the offsets and compares them to each other. So this just pulls the green line from each of those charts and shows either status quo in light blue, your control scenario, or the results from the program in this darker blue. What this allows you to see is the time series of how those two compare over time. And really the important thing you can see is where the program in some instances might in the later periods actually end up using more water over the long term. There we go. The final graphic that we have on this dashboard is a total. So what this allows you to look at, again, you have your zero line. The bars here are your outflows or your demands. You have your offsets. What this allows you to see with this summary number at the top, I know this is really small, it's easier to see on the dashboard, is a total of the water savings over the 100-year period. So the last graphic showed your time series of how that water savings might change year to year throughout the 100-year period. This just sums up all of those years over the full time period and allows you to see a total of the potential difference in water use between the program versus the status quo. So with that, Garrett, if you could set me as a presenter, please, I'm going to share my screen.
Before you do that, Natalie, I want to mention again, things we've heard to try to share the information. So the two things I recall hearing so far regarding this dashboard is the sensitivity of the industrial use projections. And Natalie mentioned we need to do some more work there, and we do. It's really hard for us to project what kind of industrial growth is going to occur. We don't have a lot of data to do that. So Natalie's made some assumptions in kind of a scenario planning way that we're probably going to flesh that out some more. And effluent, we've heard a lot about, are you properly projecting effluent and properly including it in the analysis? And Natalie is working to incorporate that as well. Were there any other major categories, Natalie, that I'm missing besides those two?
So the industrial use is something we definitely could use feedback on and adjust those assumptions, add some additional scenarios in. One piece that we are actively working on adding to the dashboard is an assumption around how much development occurs on agricultural lands, whether it's 100%, 50%, whatever the case might be. And I should say, we are also doing some additional analysis to better understand potential replenishment obligations and the ratios there. And we've committed to working closely with the GRD on understanding that analysis and making sure we're in close communication with them on all of that. Sure. Destiny, if you could, sure.
Hi, Craig Crumweedy. On the status quo line, that rate you use, does that historical rate reflect that much of that land was converted to housing?
So yes, it would reflect that. Sorry, let me back up. The way we are understanding agricultural water use is that some of it might retire to convert to housing. Some of it might retire and be vacant. Some of it might retire and convert to industrial uses. And so, yes, we're looking at reduction in agricultural acres over time. Part of this is that we know that even with this program, not all development would necessarily happen under this program. There might be agricultural acres that are within a designated provider's boundaries and could be developed under that existing designation and might be developed even absent this program. And so, yes, some of that kind of decline in agricultural acres over time is associated with housing.
Well, in the later years when you go negative, so to speak, if there is no ag to urban conversion, if the historical rate has been 4% because people have converted to housing, and if you can't convert to housing, I don't understand how the rate would stay the same at that 4%.
So right now, what we have built in here is a 2% rate of agricultural decline for Pinal and a 1.3% decline in the Phoenix AMA.
I'm sorry, I thought you said 4%, excuse me.
And I hope if I said that, I apologize if I misspoke there. The rates there are 1.3 for Phoenix and 2% for Pinal. We do hope to potentially add some tools, filters within the dashboard to address some of those types of questions as we work through the technical discussions.
Thank you.
Really good question. I'm going to, before we take more questions, I am going to run through the dashboard and some examples of scenarios that we have in the dashboard quickly. Maybe that'll answer some additional questions, but we'll at least run through that before we take more. What I would like to say is, I know this is impossible to see, but I want you all to know that this exists. The first page that you would land on when going to the dashboard is a description of the dashboard, indicating you need to select one from each of your assumption categories, one item from each of your assumption categories. I'll show you what that means in a moment. It explains a little bit the charts, just like I did just now. And it also talks about some of those assumptions that are built into the dashboard, including that agricultural attrition rate, including assumptions around density, that type of thing. It has a lot of that information on this information page at the beginning of the dashboard. From this landing page, there's arrows down at the bottom here that allow you to switch to, to the Phoenix AMA or to the Pinal AMA dashboards. So each of those dashboards, like I said, they're laid out the same, and you select one of each of two assumptions. The, excuse me, let me move that. The program rate assumption is the conversion rate that Ben talked about. So this is the acre foot per acre number that would be associated with each acre of retired agriculture that would be eligible under this program. So you can see right now I have this set at 1. And I clicked it, and it actually, maybe that's a good example. If I click it and it removes that filter, you'll get invalid results. So you do need to make sure that you have a filter on for each of the two assumptions. The other assumption that I have built in here is a replenishment rate. What we have selected right now, it says CAGRD 2015. And what that rate reflects is we took the forecasts that were built into the CAGRD's 2015 plan of operation and just continued that forecast for this replenishment. So it reflects that any incremental increase in replenishment according to that plan is applied to these lands. So it's an imperfect metric, but it's an available piece of data. We also have built into here a tool to be able to kind of play around with replenishment rate assumptions, going from 0%, or where it says 0.33, this reflects 33% replenishment, 67% replenishment, or 100% replenishment. So right now I have 1 acre foot per acre and the CAGRD 2015 kind of trajectory for replenishment selected. And you can see that when we compare the two net water uses over time, in the projection period, the status quo is always a higher water use than the program. Or said another way, the entire projection period reflects conservation associated with the program. The status quo in this scenario is 15.1 million acre feet over the total period as compared to 8.2 million acre feet for the program period. If we go to a higher conversion rate, using that same replenishment assumption, there we go, you can see that the charts change, and you can see how in the program projection period, the program could actually begin using more water than your kind of status quo projection scenario. What we are seeing is really important as a part of this program is that the program would realize significant water conservation associated with the life of the program, associated with the life of the housing that it builds. The kind of hard thing to understand here that's maybe not intuitive is that agricultural water use might decline over time, but once you build those houses, that tends to be a permanent water use. And so we really want to be looking at the very long term here and ensuring that we are not increasing total groundwater demands in the long term. The same analysis or same, the same filters are available on the Pinal tool, same different categories. So what this really enables folks to do is play around with this data and better understand how different assumptions influence the final results of all of this. We do plan, like I said, to continue to update this data, to add additional assumptions and filters and tools to this dashboard over time. And we'll be diving more into the details of all of that in that technical group. So with that, I think I can hand it back to Ben and we can take any additional questions.
Yeah, again, very informal. There we go.
Thank you. Alexandra Arboleda. I am with the law firm of Gamage and Burnham. I'm representing Harvard Investments and Cowley Companies, and appreciate you all hosting this stakeholder meeting so that we can have a discussion about this important issue. We think that Ag to Urban presents a great opportunity to allow responsible development, create a bridge towards a future with alternative water supplies, and especially in the Phoenix AMA and the Pinal AMA, where people can't get new certificates of assured water supply approved. It's been a real challenge. And so we appreciate this conversation. And I guess the point I also want to say, we appreciate you sharing the data and creating a dashboard so we could actually look at, what's behind the numbers. I think we still have a lot of questions about some of those assumptions and would like to work through those. I think Craig Crumwoody identified one of the big issues, I think, is the assumption that ag land will go to zero, that it in the future, that ag land that's currently being used, but doesn't really have many options. So that's my client's situation, is they have ag land that's in the path of development, often infrastructure around it, but now they can't move forward with that development. So the only option really is to continue pumping for agricultural uses because they have irrigation grandfathered rights. And some of those are pretty high. So, some of them are 7 to 8 acre feet per acre. Some are 4 acre feet per acre or 3.5. They vary, but they're using them every year to grow crops. And so we're looking for a path forward for a solution. We think that it makes sense for the aquifer and also for the state of Arizona and development to be able to find a way to use that ag land, allow some development on it, consistent with the assured water supply. So my comment is, even though we disagree with some of the assumptions or have questions about some of the assumptions, I am encouraged because I think that the dashboard shows that in the Phoenix AMA, if the conversion rate is 2 acre-feet per acre or 1.5 acre-feet per acre, if there's some level of replenishment, that there will be water savings if you compare it to the status quo line. And in the Pinal AMA, the dashboard also shows that at 1.5 acre-foot per acre conversion rate, if you have some level of replenishment, that you will also have water savings as compared to the status quo. So I'm encouraged by that data. I think that shows that this is a good program, and I guess would appreciate maybe a little more of the background on kind of how you got to some of the assumptions that are in the dashboard. Thank
So
you.
Alex, I guess I'll say a few things. First, we agree with you that this concept can have great value for the state. 100% agree with you. In terms of your last question, we talked about creating this technical work group to take a deeper dive. That's where we can get into the assumptions and really get down into the weeds with everybody who wants to be part of that. I think the question in the middle of your discussion, there's no doubt there are savings at different levels. The policy is going to be how much of a savings do we really want to try to hit with this program? Is it 100,000 acre feet, 1 million acre feet, 10 million acre feet? What is it? And that's where we're trying to build consensus around that number. There will be some that will be like, it's got to be 1 million, and there'll be some that 100,000 is enough. Different viewpoints from different folks. You know that I made pitches in a couple of different places, including the Governor's Water Policy Council, that in kind of the future that's facing us, when you look at holistically all the water supplies available to us, is, as Ben mentioned at the beginning, an era of limits. We haven't even begun to try to assess what post-2026 Colorado River reductions are going to do to our groundwater supplies. Our ag friends have already been cut off from those CAP supplies, right? So they're not going to increase their pumping because of it. But other sectors, municipal, industrial, are going to, right? So those are all part and parcel of the discussions that we're going to have over time in this group to try to build consensus for numbers that make sense. And I recognize different numbers will show different levels of savings. And I think that's going to be one of the most important outcomes of this process, to build the consensus so we have the support we need for the rulemaking process that Ben described. And I know there'll be different viewpoints about how big the savings should be.
May I ask one more question? We didn't talk about the guardrail, about whether this applies only where you have a designation of assured water supply or a certificate of assured water supply. But I think that's one of the other challenges, is a lot of the ag land that would be eligible is outside of a designated provider service area. And if you would like to respond to that question, that would be.
So, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you said it yourself that this program can incentivize a transition to renewable supplies, right? That leg of that is through the designated designation process. If you do this on the certificate process, they have their groundwater. I'm not seeing the incentive for those developments or homes to switch over to renewable supplies out into the future. That incentive is there in the designated side of this, and that's pretty much why we're heading down that path on the designated side.
Anybody else?
Warren Tenney with AMWA. Thank you for the presentation today. I think even just the few issues that have been brought up in the presentation, as well as questions that have been asked, shows how important it is going to be to make sure we get this right so that at the end of this effort that whatever final proposal is there, it actually does show a benefit. And unfortunately, I think from the conversation and everything that's showing is that's going to take some time. And yet it is really important that we get it right the first time when we're doing this. So appreciate the department's efforts on that. One of the thoughts that with what the director just said in regards with a big discussion will be over, well, how much savings do we need to have? I think it will be important, not especially if we're showing, if we're starting to gravitate towards a lesser amount for the whole AMA overall as a savings. And even if we're showing a larger amount, I think it will be important to also make sure that that the analysis is showing that there isn't any local or specific areas within the AMA that somehow then become negatively impacted. Because I could see a potential of overall, it might benefit the AMA, but let's make sure that there's no local negative impacts. And then just two quick questions. I just wanted to confirm that what I heard in regards with eligibility is that the department is looking at only IGFRs that have been irrigated with groundwater. Now, how that might apply to IGFRs that have also been irrigated with surface water is another discussion. But right now, the intention of this program is looking at only IGFRs that have been watered with groundwater. And I'm seeing,
Yeah, there's certainly some nuance there, but that's correct.
Yeah.
Tom.
Again, the entities that have surface water, if they qualify under the program, they can use that surface water to grow right now. They don't need this program. Now, there are, as Gary pointed out, kind of connections that we need to look at for those entities who have both of those things, right? And we committed to have that discussion with those irrigation districts and those farmers. In terms of the localized impacts, this is going to require a modeling test, right? We're not doing away with that. And hopefully I can get this right because I'm not a modeling person, but we're going to be looking at the cells from which this water would be pumped in our model to make sure that the water's not, for example, going below the 1,000-foot threshold. So there are some protections in those localized areas, as you suggested there should be. And did I get that right?
and then just hopefully real quick, I'm curious of how the department is wanting to look at all 7 guardrails at this, because it seems that the conversion rate is going to, what we might want to end up utilizing will be affected by how the 6 other guardrails are decided. And so I'm just kind of curious of how you're looking at navigating, starting to talk about conversion rate, but also needing to address or make decisions about what we want to do, what the metrics should be for those other guardrails. Thank you.
Lauren, we're going back to the guardrail slide, and we are going to get into each one of these in future meetings, but one that comes to mind in terms of the connection you just described is that second development of conservation measures, right? If you have a smaller water footprint through processes that we could make as part of this program, that can play into what the conversion rate is, right? And you know, and I've advocated for a tighter and smaller water footprint. We might have to do some things because we hear from the development and home builders that perhaps requirements of the municipal jurisdictions they grow in might be forcing them to a larger water footprint. For example, we hear that retention basins, for example, in some jurisdictions, they want grass in the retention basins, right? So we recognize the connection and we need to work through that. But you got to have that elephant eaten one bite at a time, right? We will get to all of these and then connect them back all together in the discussion.
Good morning. My name is Laura Grignano, and I'm the manager of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And thank you, Director. We appreciate, CAWCD appreciates the opportunity to participate today and to provide comments. And I specifically appreciate the acknowledgement of the 2025 Plan of Operation that's currently under the review with the department and the importance of that plan to the Assured Water Supply Program. So at the December 2nd Governor's Water Policy meeting, CAWCD stated that ADWR's analysis, which we've looked at again today, was certainly sobering in some of the numbers regarding the additional replenishment that could be placed on CAGRD in the future. Our preliminary review confirms that ag to urban could have longer term implications for CAGRD. And the additional groundwater-based physical availability and associated replenishment puts added pressure on CAGRD to acquire renewable supplies at a time when potentially available supplies are becoming increasingly scarce. With that said, the specifics of the conversion rate, eligibility criteria, and the program timeframe, as well as limited applicability to designations, will dictate the magnitude of the impact on CAGRD. It's important to have a process like this to work out the details. We currently have over 1,200 member lands and 24 member service areas, and we must be cautious about putting additional risk on CAGRD and its current and future members who rely on our continued success. We don't want to get, CAWCD staff does not want to get out ahead of our board, of course, on these issues. And so we plan to start discussing these concepts with them in more detail. And thank you for, again, the opportunity to be participating in this program. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to you and your folks. You spent a lot of time talking with us already, and we're going to need to have a lot more discussion with you all as we work through this. And we recognize the need to protect the existing structure of the GRD and the existing development that's been reliant upon the GRD, and the folks that are in those homes who are already there relying on the GRD, whether they know or not that they do rely on the GRD. So it's a really important issue to us. And again, I mentioned the word holistic earlier. We do have to look at all of these things in a holistic way because it all fits together in a puzzle or in overlapping Venn diagrams or whatever, however you want to describe those connections.
Rob Anderson with law firm of Fenimore here in Phoenix. I'm here on behalf of Home Builders Association of Central Arizona. Thanks to the department for hosting this and for continuing the discussion on ag to urban. We participated in the legislative process with the department last spring, and I think we made a lot of progress. We didn't quite get there, but we obviously have some issues that we need to work through. I just want to go up to the big picture for a moment. Our past experience, one of the departments, and frankly, I think we are all proud of this slide that shows that our water use since 1959, we're basically using the same amount of water, but we've grown tremendously. And the reason, the driving force behind that has been urbanization of farmland as well as conservation. And there's every reason to believe that those trends will continue going into the future. And so to the extent we can get our ag to urban to work, I think we should have a high confidence level that it will work and it will result in net improvements in water policy and water use. I do want to say something about the dashboard. I found the dashboard to be very useful. I think a number of us have found it to be very useful. Natalie has done tremendous work on it. Its true value is in understanding the relationship between the various components. And it's very useful for that, understanding that replenishment versus conversion rates versus whatever else and how those interact. We need to have some humility when we work with it because we are trying to project water uses out 100 years. And that's a bit of a challenge. And whether or not this program works is really based on what your assumptions are. As Alex has pointed out, one of the biggest ones is what happens to ag lands and ag attrition over time. So there's a fair amount of guesswork involved with that. And again, I think if we look back and we look forward, we have every reason to believe that urbanization will result in lower water uses and more efficient water uses over time. I want to just talk briefly about the conversion rate for a second. We had a lot of discussion about this. For this program to function, it needs to support viable housing. And the conversion rate could very well dictate whether or not we have viable housing or not. One of our major concerns is with density. If we're going to end up with conversion rates, that means we're going to put 1 house per acre or 2 houses per acre. I would submit that that's bad housing policy and bad water policy. We need to be able to support higher densities. The point at which we had a lot of discussion, the department knows this quite well, and just for the benefit of other people in the room, is the projected water demands versus the actual water demands. And as we know from attempting to get certificates of assured water supply, that the amount of water that's projected to be used by housing development is typically substantially higher than what's actually used over time. And our concerns with using actual water uses is it will come in and apply for certificates of assured water supply, and we won't be able to get them because our projected water use will be much higher. So we need to bridge that gap. And as the director mentioned, we have a concern with amenities. We are oftentimes required to do turfing areas that result in higher water demand. So consideration of that is really important. But on that point, density is really a very important thing. Again, if we're going to be doing a house per acre or 2 houses per acre, I would submit that we're not. This is not a successful program. Affordability is really a driving issue in the housing market today. And what we're seeing is less and less land being available for housing development. That's driving up prices of land, that's driving up prices of houses. And so my last point to touch on this, I know that this is not a sideboard that was brought up, but this idea of limiting the program to designations. This is just for everybody's benefit, this is new. This was not part of the discussions last spring. And I recognize we recognize some of the advantages to doing it this way. The director made points a few minutes ago. Very concerned from our standpoint that this will limit the program and will limit the ability to utilize this. There are some designations that are moving forward, but there are large areas that are not subject to designations today. Those designations will take time, and the delay that's associated with that is going to be a problem. So we don't support the limitation of this to designations only, and we'd like to see it available for certificate purposes. So anyway, thank you.
So Rob, I recognize that perhaps in last spring's discussion related to the legislation that was introduced, perhaps didn't have this concept, but certainly last fall and in the Water Policy Council discussion, we threw out this idea that it would be just available to designations. And we do want to work with you all on the actual versus projected demand issue. And we don't have the time to get into all the details there because we recognize how important that issue is. And, in the certificate process, we haven't seen much of a desire for certificate holders or certificate applicants to reduce their requested water volumes. And maybe some of that's related to the department's demand calculator, which is a tool that's not mandatory, and developers can come in and make their case for the volume that they want in their application. So, and I know it's more complicated than that, but we agree with you. If this program ends up creating an outcome in which you can only put 1 or 2 houses on an acre of land, we're going to still have a huge shortfall in housing availability. So it is an issue that we are aware of, and we'll continue to work with all of you on that issue.
I wanted to just add, Rob Anderson again, to the. I have to learn how to handle a microphone, apparently. I just wanted to add just a little bit more detail to that, to build on what the director just said. The department has been willing to work with us on that demand calculator. There's no question about that. And we've appreciated that. The thing we keep running into is vacant houses, vacant lots. If you look at an existing urbanized area of Phoenix, there's a bunch of vacant lots in there. And when you go apply for a certificate of assured water supply, you assign a water use to every little piece of land. And that's where the challenge has been. So we appreciate it. I just wanted to make clear that the demand calculator hasn't really been a huge issue, that I think applicants would agree to put forward more a lower water demand, showing what the likely actual uses would be. So I think there's some room for some working together on that one. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, we have a gentleman in the back.
Paul Gardner, Town of Queen Creek. I just had a couple of questions or observations. Out in Queen Creek, we have in our service territory that's not state lands that are being under ag, we probably have close to 3,500 or 4,000 acres left of farmland that ended up having analysis of assured water supply and never converted over to certificates. They belong to irrigation districts that receive GSFs. So a typical 400 acre parcel may use 2.5 acre feet of groundwater and the rest 2 acre feet of a GSF. How is the department going to look at that? And do I go tell my landowners, hey, quit doing the GSFs, let's just pump groundwater for the next 3 years and you'll get a much better number? That's question number one. And number two, when you are, we are with our newer subdivisions with conservation practices, we're finding that for every acre foot we send to properties, we're receiving anywhere from 4/10 to 7/10 of the acre foot back through our effluent. And then we're able to put that back into the ground. And so the net use per acre foot consumed is somewhere between 6/10 to 3/10 of acre foot. Is where you have combined systems, is that going to be a part of the formula that we're looking at as we're forecasting, in that you have this effluent you pledge back towards the development? So the net obligation back to CAGRD is the 2/3, which I think is from the 2015 model, might be 2/3 of the 6/10 of an acre foot or 3/10 of an acre foot per however volume we send. So those are the two questions. How do we handle GSFs on ag models on reach? And then what do we do with the effluent?
Okay, thank you for the question. So regarding GSFs, the water used at a GSF is accounted for as groundwater in the year that it is used on the farm. The kind of mechanism there is that the GSF permit is based on a reduction of pumping, and it creates credits and still represents a net debit to the aquifer, because those credits that used to be groundwater are now some other type of water. So, in terms of GSF water, the way we're looking at it right now is that the water used on those farms in that year is legally groundwater, and we're considering it as groundwater. So, for your other question regarding effluent, there's probably additional discussion to be had regarding that specific piece. As it stands right now, there hasn't been a discussion around requiring the effluent to be pledged back to the development in the way that you said. So we haven't included effluent as an offset in the analysis at this point because it's not a requirement. And in theory, it could be used to support other development or additional housing or something like that. Now, we could certainly have a conversation about a requirement like that and incorporate that type of thing into the analysis.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess one of the other things is the municipality or utility could just apply it how they want, and then whatever's left over is quote unquote groundwater. If you're recovering effluent to serve that subdivision or somewhere else, whatever's left over, then that would be our obligation to CHERD, I guess is the difference. So I understand that. So either effluent can be part of the model or it's not, and then we just are dealing directly with CHERD. That's helpful to me.
On the technical group, is it going to be efficacious for, or like a group like Arlington Canal Company to hire an expert to be there to have input? Is that necessary on this technical group you're talking about, or what you're going to decide? Do we need representation there as far as with a technical person? Do you need for input?
So Gary, I don't want to give you that advice one way or the other. I don't want to see anyone incur huge expenses for no reason. Maybe you can band together with some of your fellow agricultural folks, some of the districts. I think it would be important that the technical group is followed and you have opportunity to understand the numbers on all the assumptions, because it's a very deep dive to do that. So I would just encourage you to do so, and at what level. Hopefully we can make the technical group conversations simple enough that normal folks like us can understand these things without having to go higher.
I just don't want to be in the situation to finding out what happened rather than knowing what happened. And then one more question, or just a comment that we are at the tail end of the AMA in Phoenix. We measure our water table every month consistently, pumping level and static level. We've been measuring for about the last 15 years. We've not dropped an inch. And the little valley down there uses about 30,000 acre feet a year. So we're one of the ones here that have water. That's our stakeholder in this thing, or have control. And the only point want to make, and I'm going to shut up, is you got to really think seriously about, do you want agriculture to disappear in Arizona? Do you want that to happen? Because that's where we're headed. You just drive down the freeways and everything. Is that what we're talking about? Is there any other way to find a way to skin this animal? Because we've been there since 1993, and I just hate to see agriculture disappear in this area. And I don't have an answer how to keep it from disappearing.
So we have put this program together in a way that is voluntary. It gives the farmers the opportunity to do what they want to do with their land, keep farming or go into this program. As to the information you shared about measuring water levels, we have a portal. We'd love it if you'd go into the portal and send that data to us. Or that's awesome. Or if you're willing to talk with our hydro folks We have our own process to go out and do those water level measurements. We need the permission of the landowner. Be happy to talk with your group about that. We like good, accurate data. Helps us figure out what's going on. Governor Lewis?
Thank you, Governor Lewis from the Gila River Indian Community, and to the gentleman's comments too. We support ag, and we're very concerned about that as well. But also, I think you know, I think we're finding out that what we're tackling, and you know, it's a lot more complicated, I think, than we or that we're seeing and that we're realizing now, especially from last year. But I really appreciate, Tom, you know, to your comments about, you know, making sure that we have the science, we have the data, that we have meetings like this with stakeholders, public meetings that are transparent. I think that's critical as we're moving forward. But I want to go back also to the conservation box, and you know, being in these meetings with upper basin, lower basin states along, you know, these negotiations along the Colorado River. I know what comes up is, you know, a lot among the other states is, you know, the turf bans, lakes, cooling towers, you know, those, I think those conservation, those measures, and I'm wondering is, you know, are those going to be considered in some form or fashion?
So, Governor, we will add that to the mix, and you're giving me PTSD when you're talking about Colorado River negotiations. But yes, we will add that to the mix.
There we are. Good morning still, and thank you. Scott Riggins, Production Agriculture and Land Investment in the Pinella AMA. Prior to disagreeing with a few assumptions, I would like to applaud the department for being in this process. It's a very important thing for the state right now in many sectors. Many things are interwoven together, and trying to get this right is very important. One of the aspects that I can see that's been worked into this is the concept of trying to set parameters that lead into the greatest water savings, the greatest groundwater savings as rapidly as possible. In the screenshots I've seen concerning land eligibility and also conversion rates, one thing that has been baked into this cake is the fact that agricultural water use continues to go down forever. Well, that's an interesting concept. We've been in a period of time since when I began being in production agriculture in the early 80s. The 80s were a magnificent decade, and it's been flat or down ever since. During that same period, water costs and availabilities have gone up markedly, and so have a great deal of other costs. If we look at our records of agricultural water use diminishment, one of the big things that's been in that obviously is the fact that we no longer have, nor does anybody believe we'll ever have, any agricultural Colorado River water anymore. It's been a large piece of the diminishment. A great other large piece of the diminishment is since the 1980 Groundwater Act went into effect, there is not the well fields, and I'll deal with the Pinella AMA, so I'll speak to it specifically. There's not the well fields that there used to be, because cotton, when I sold my first crop in 1981 at 81 cents, with a $1981, cotton is priced below that in 2025. It's easy to see why agricultural water uses have fallen off. What it used to take to fix a pump and make that run water again, what it took to rehab a well, all those things have gotten very expensive. However, if you look at the history of agriculture in the state of Arizona, you'll find that there are times that policies and world events change the commodity basis. We haven't seen that for quite some time. We've been in a fairly stable world during the period of time from 1980. That is becoming not so much the facts. We've seen in Arizona, we've seen in the West Phoenix AMA and outside, we've seen enormous monies developed to do land back into production for various export reasons and reasons that were totally because of somebody had a profit motive they could find. We've definitely seen in the Wilcox area, we have seen where profitability led to difficulties the department's trying to deal with now. I believe it is very short-sighted to assume that what you've seen in your models, what you've applied to your models, that you're using eligibility and conversion factors based on agricultural production and water use just continues to go down. I would hazard to say that one of the things that the water model needs to be concerned about and no longer is concerned about is in the Pinnell AMA, there's a great deal of infrastructure in place. The fields are existent and they're ready to be farmed. The only thing that really is keeping them from being farmed is commodity prices are not putting wells back in the ground. We've got a lot of wells that are gone. We never can have as many as there were, but believe me, there's a lot of them that can be rehabbed and put back in. And if you get a large commodity increase, you could have a 5-year spike that used an enormous amount of water. So I do believe in your models, you are holding back land eligibility in a fashion that is wrong because you're thinking it will lead to more immediate savings of groundwater, but you're not taking into account that really lands that may not have been pumped very hard over the last several years, they certainly could be pumped very hard again, very quickly under the right circumstances. There really is nothing whatsoever preventing that other than profitability. And those commodity prices, they don't stay low forever. And likewise, in your conversion factors, you want to get people to go into this program. You want to take unused irrigation grandfathered rights and get them converted, because that will lead to many of the benefits many of the speakers have spoken to here, but it also removes an enormous amount of potential groundwater pumpage that is, particularly in the Pinnell AMA, entirely unreplenished off the books. So I would hazard to say, I hope in this technical work group and the discussions going forward, there's a great deal of discussion that just because you've seen in your modeling that agriculture just continues to use less water, there comes a point in time where that might not be the case, and the switch can be turned so much faster than you think.
Do have some online comments whenever you're ready.
This is Nick Vanderway. I'm a West Valley farmer and landowner, and agree with Mr. Riggins' comments that how they specifically apply to Pinnell. But in the West Valley, there is no fallow farm ground. The farm ground will either develop if it's allowed to, or it'll keep farming because the water is plentiful. To Mr. Gable's point, I mean, it's very shallow. There's plenty of water. There's, in addition to surface water rights. So the idea that if we're not allowed to develop, the West Valley will just keep farming and will be pumping at its rates that it's currently pumping, and we get a commodity spike, will double crop and be even more aggressive. Another thing, kind of speaking to the shallow groundwater in the West Valley, if on the dashboard for the Phoenix AMA, if you select what you would say is the most aggressive options available is the 2 acre-feet allocation with a 0 replenishment. After for 25 years, until 2050, this program would actually use less groundwater, and then it does cross over, and after 100 years, it adds up to using 4 million acre-feet more with the program versus your projected ag, which kind of said that the projected ag is underestimating. But even with that, using the projected ag, the status quo, it's 4.3 million acre feet. Well, if you just allocate that only to the West Valley, only to say the BID, RID, roughly just say 40,000 acre feet of farm ground, well, that in 100 years, that drops at 110 feet. Well, I propose that that would be a net benefit to development to actually get the water table down 100 feet. And it's nowhere near any kind of limit. So even in the most aggressive scenario of no replenishment, 2 acre feet, we're still benefiting the West Valley from a groundwater standpoint. And then, as we've heard from Queen Creek, I mean, half of that's going to be coming back in effluent and going back in anyway.
Hi, good morning. Jake Lenderking with Global Water Resources. Thanks for having this this meeting and inviting us all here. I'm here representing Global Water Resources. We have water systems in Pinal, Phoenix, and the Tucson active management areas. So I also want to say in all those areas, we also have agriculture. And we've long sought a program like this. We've had small discussions with stakeholders in the Pinal AMA going back a decade or so now. And so have many others. And we're really appreciative that the state's taken this up today. I think it's going to be very important that we look at the science and data carefully. Often we think a lower conversion rate is going to save the most water, but I think when we look into that science and data, we might find that the sweet spot to actually get the conversions will help save more water because you get the conversions. So it's going to be important to look at that and find the sweet spot. Additionally, I think that with the loss of the ag pool of water, we are going to continue to see additional groundwater pumping by ag over time. And we should think about how ag will change into the future to use more groundwater. Lastly, I'd like to request the inclusion, at least as while we study it and work through this, the inclusion of the Tucson AMA. I know the Tucson AMA is not closed to new appropriations of groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program as the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs are, but we could avoid a costly or timely delay in the future should the Tucson AMA close. So I think now is a nice time with good synergy with staff, good synergy with the programmatic elements. There could be a lot of time savings and resource savings by at least looking at it right now. Thank you.
We've got a few mics out there right now. We've had one person waiting very patiently, so we'll turn it over to Chris Johnson online, and then we'll just pick up right where we left off here in the room. Chris, if you go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm Chris Johnson, and I have been working with West Valley water users for over 25 years. I would like to state that Arlington currently does upload their monthly water levels to your portal. That has been done for over 10 years. So the water levels in their district are available to you through your portal. My other question is about exempt rights and farmers who may have picked up an exempt right and now has it as part of their farming operation. So now it is a non-exempt right. Previously, when it was an exempt right, there was no water use reported. How will that be looked at? And going back to Stacy's question about the 3 to 5 years of water use. So in other words, if the farm reported water use for 3 of any of the 5 years, they would be eligible, correct?
Thanks, Chris. This is Natalie Mast. So I don't think we've really evaluated the exempt right question. The department does have access to satellite imagery that we maybe could use to evaluate that type of thing, but we'll certainly need to have some additional discussions there. So thank you for raising that. And I've lost track of what the second question was. 3 out of
It
5,
was a 3
sorry.
to 5 years where
Yes.
Stacy asked about that. So if you're looking at years 2020 through 2024, if they reported zero use in 2020 and 2021, but reported use in 22, 23, and 24, that would make them eligible?
So the way we're looking at it right now is water use in 3 out of the last 5 years. Yes, so any 3 out of the last 5 years.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is Director Brzezinski. Thank you for providing that information to us through the portal.
All right, we can pick back up in the room. I don't know where we're at, Destiny, but.
Jack Earhart, I drove down from Kingman this morning to put on the record about our situation with our Wallapai Aquifer. I'm a past planning director and sustainability consultant to the Arizona Department of Military Emergency Affairs. So I understand, obviously, the hard work and you guys working on sustainability for water resources, but you designated our Wallapai Aquifer as an INA when it should have been an AMA. We sent information to you with a good argument, and I'm against attorneys being involved, but you guys can do what you want. So my request is that you would consider a statewide AMA rather than these INAs that don't stop large water users. Right now in our aquifer is a proposed pumped hydroelectric production facility that would put in 2 extra large lakes that would definitely affect the Wallapai Aquifer. So again, I'm requesting that you consider putting the whole state in an AMA. And I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
So thanks. I do want to mention that in discussions that are ongoing regarding rural groundwater management, I think we've identified the Wallapai Basin as one of the areas, if the state's version of that legislation were to move forward and become law, that Wallapai Basin would be one of the basins that would initially be in that new program. And that legislation, from the state's view, we expect the new version to get dropped at the legislature within the next week or 2. So there's another avenue there for that basin that you may not be aware of.
Hi, Simone Jules, Root City of Chandler again. And my question is for Natalie. Sorry, I'm trying to dodge to see you. Just a point of clarification on how the dashboard works in terms of calculating water savings. Is the calculation of potential groundwater savings based on the assumption that the IGFR is pumping the total volume of the IGFR rather than what that actual annual pumping is? So is it based on the total of the IGFR or the actual annual pumping reported?
No, so it's not based on the total volume of the IGFR. It's based on the average water use. When we pulled data for this analysis, the years we used it was 2018 through 2022 were the 5 calendar years that were used for the analysis. So it's actual average groundwater use
for each particular IGFR.
For each AMA. So it's averaged across the AMAs, and then as they reduce over time, it's reduced. So it's not specific to each IGFR. We just use acre foot per acre averages across the AMAs.
Okay.
We can get into all the weeds of that in the technical group, and I'm happy to answer more questions and explain more of that at that time.
Can you wait for a mic, please?
Yeah, would you mind stating what you're using as the number that the houses use, warehouses use per acre, and then what you're using as a number for farming?
I would be glad to get into the weeds of that.
Okay.
I don't have those numbers
All
in
right.
front of me right this moment, but we can certainly get into the weeds of all of that as a part of the technical group.
Thank you.
Online, Maddie Mercer has a comment. Maddie, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Part of this public process. Can you hear me okay? My mic's saying that it might not be working.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the presentation and going over the dashboard. I also wanted to raise a concern about farmland loss. So I work with the City of Phoenix's food systems team and the Office of Environmental Programs, and our work is guided by the 2025 Food Action Plan, which Council approved in 2020. The plan outlines our goals to maintain a sustainable environment by helping Phoenix farmers, primarily urban growers, to adopt sustainable practices. We really recognize and are committed to the importance of water conservation, but we're also really concerned about farmland conservation. In Maricopa County, farmland is disappearing faster here than anywhere else in the United States, and this has implications for our community's food security and local food economy. So we, again, have a big issue around this. We want to support this program and support water conservation. And I was wondering if it might be possible to integrate another component of the dashboard that showcased the water savings if farmers were to implement different sustainability and water conservation practices, like another thing that you could toggle on and off if, you know, X percentage of farmers implemented some of your other conservation programs in addition to what the water savings of the programs might be.
So this is Director Bishotsky, and I appreciate that comment, and we'll think some more about it. But my initial reaction is that this program isn't designed to try to drive farmers to different farming practices. That's another policy discussion in my mind. But I appreciate what you put on the table and why. But that's my gut reaction to that request.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you. And I wondered too, and since it is a voluntary program, maybe it's future in kind of the outreach stage where you're sharing information with farmers about this program and the opportunity, and then simultaneously sharing some information about some other programs so farmers have an idea of what their full suite of options might look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? I don't see any else.
So we're not hearing any other questions or comments from anyone in the room or online. So I'll just close by saying, from my perspective, the creation of this program is a when, not an if. We are going to work through these issues. We are going to come to consensus on all the elements of this program. It is a pretty high priority for us to make this program work. Again, we appreciate what the farming community does for us. We want this to be voluntary. We don't want to force farms out of business. We recognize the value of those farms, the value of the food, the value of the open space, all those things those farms create. But we also want to find a path forward to build houses because we need houses. So this program, as we work through all of this with you, it's going to happen. So we'll need perhaps compromise as we reach consensus. We'll need everyone to understand the holistic nature of what our water supplies are in this state, what the stressors on those water supplies are. So I appreciate everyone's participation today. Look forward to continuing to have these discussions with you and any of your friends that might want to join us in this process. We'll consider the specific work group for those unique farmers who have these old surface water rights and are also pumping. I think that's important. Again, we brought up the issue that part of that discussion is going to be about maybe what water those wells are actually pumping in those areas, whether it's the river or groundwater. I mean, our department makes the assumption that water coming out of wells is groundwater, unless either proven otherwise by an applicant in some process, or as the adjudication court gets into that issue throughout the entire Gila River and Little Colorado River system and source. So again, thank you everybody for attending today. We'll post the recording and post these slides on our website, and I encourage you all to look at that. We'll let you know through that website, and maybe an email blast, Natalie, when we're going to have the technical work group on the dashboard convened. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, just in time. We've got it posted right here that the first technical working group meeting will be on January 30th. I know that there's a lot going on. We're right in the middle of session, but that's, we're trying to keep things moving along. And then the next informal stakeholder meeting will be on February 6th. All information about these meetings will be posted on the Ag to Urban dedicated webpage, which you can find right here at this, or if you just Google Ag to Urban ADWR, it'll get you there. Also at ag, the number 2 urban at azwater.gov. Send any questions, any follow-up, and we'll be responsive to you.
We had hoped to have maybe some legislators or their staff here today. We set this meeting before we knew the legislature's schedule, and there was some stuff going on there today that probably resulted in those folks not being able to attend. But that's a difficult coordination to do. So again, thank you, everybody. And I think we're adjourned.